Welcome to another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, where certified financial planner Lauren Sherman shares thoughts on having a healthy mind, body, and spirit, an abundance of wealth inside portfolios and out, and lessons learned from clients and mentors over the years.
Welcome, everyone, to another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. And as always, I am your host, Lauren Sherman. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Rinderknecht. Reed is a financial advisor here in West Des Moines, Iowa, and he is the most senior advisor of the firm Foster Group. Of course, he made sure to explain that only means he is the most tenured, but not the oldest. We will discuss Reed's role with Foster Group during part 2 of our conversation. But first, I thought it would be helpful for the audience to get to know Reed, as he has quite the story to share. Just to give you a teaser of what we will talk about, Reed had the privilege of competing for the Iowa Hawkeyes football team, in which they won the Big Ten and made the Rose Bowl back in 1991. Reed also talked about competing in over 80 triathlons, and he shared some of his experience as a pilot. So stick around as we dive into the conversation, and as a reminder, this is another video episode, so if you are listening on one of the podcast apps, you can switch over to YouTube if you'd like to watch the conversation. So as we continue this trend of sitting down with some of the local financial advisors in the Des Moines, Iowa area, today, Reed Rinderknecht of Foster Group joins us. Reed is both a certified financial planner and he holds the Kingdom Advisors designation, and he's one of the senior lead advisors at his firm. So Reed, I appreciate you doing this and welcome into the show.
Yeah, you bet, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
We talked about this a little bit ahead of time, but I don't know if you remember this, how well you remember this, but I think it was around 2010 or 12 where I came in, I think I met you through Bernie Lowe and Associates and doing disability insurance for a lot of the doctors and dentists in the state of Iowa, many of whom were clients of Foster Group back at your old location before you guys moved out west. Yeah. So I don't know if that rings a bell at all, but that's going back a little ways.
Yeah, it is for sure. No, we had a great relationship with several folks like that. And, we were both a lot younger then.
Yeah, right. Well, I like to break these conversations up into two parts. First, where we get to know you a little bit, and we'll talk about your past of playing football for the Iowa Hawkeyes. We'll definitely have to talk about all the triathlons that you've completed. And then even how you stepped that up a notch and took on the Ironmans, and what kind of, sane person would willingly do that, I suppose, of the bike, run, and swimming that far. Yeah. And then we'll wrap up with a few questions about your love of flying and just kind of what you've learned from your flights over the years. And then for part 2, we will discuss your role at Foster Group, what type of clients you work best with, ask you to share some of your process, investment philosophy, that kind of thing.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, with that quick introduction, I was actually looking at your bio on Foster's website, and I saw a couple of things that stood out that I wanted to ask about. So first, University of Iowa 92, and you were part of the 1991 football team. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, I grew up a Cyclone. My parents both went to Iowa State, and dreamed of playing football at Iowa State as a kid, and got a lot of autographs from former players, and which I think I still have a few things from like Dwayne Crutchfield and Rocky Gillis and Tracy Henderson and some of the Cyclone greats. But coming out of school, I knew I wanted to be a business major and maybe law school at the time, and so. Had a chance, same opportunity at Iowa and Iowa State both. And Coach Bill Brazier came down to Ottumwa, and he was Hayden's defensive coordinator and longtime assistant. And, we sat in the office of the 80s office. He's like, Reed, he's like got this Southern Texas draw. Reed, do you want a couple of these bowl rings and bowl watches, or do you want to go to Iowa State? And so he had his Rose Bowl ring on, and I thought that was pretty cool. And so went up there for a visit and kind of fell in love with the place. Coach Fry was amazing, mentor, and, didn't get to play a lot my 4 years there, a little bit my senior year, but man, learned a lot about life. Grew up a ton, in my years there, just managing school and social and football. And yeah, I had a chance to go to the 91 Rose Bowl, actually Peach, Rose, and Holiday Bowls. We had
Okay.
some really good teams. And just great experience, walking out on the field on the Rose Bowl. I think I about fell over. And so, that was a great experience, but really, I think taught me a lot about life and just how hard it is and how you got to pick yourself up from, various, getting cut down various times. So
Yeah.
overall, just a really great experience there.
I'm curious if you still stay in touch with any of your teammates from back then.
Yeah, we do. And kind of funny you mention it. They have started an alumni group of former players that they're doing a really great job of staying in touch and doing socials now. And so it's a little better than it's ever been just the last probably 3 or 4 years. And so get to see a lot of the guys. And there's quite a few in Des Moines that are former players and they keep in touch with. And obviously with social media, we get a chance to.
Nice. Yeah, I remember a few years back I did a golf event with a bunch of Cyclone alumni at Coldwater up there in Ames.
Yeah.
So yeah, the events like that are pretty cool where you get together a lot of the different generations that have graduated.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure. Absolutely. And then I spent 4 years in Wichita at Beach Aircraft Company, did corporate finance, and then made a decision to move back to Des Moines. And my brother actually kind of talked me into getting into the financial services business. He was a financial advisor for AAL and then principal and now kind of on his own. But he kind of talked me into getting into this business and spent a year at Financial Architects and then found Foster Group 27 years ago. And we were a little $100 million firm back then and 8 people. And, now about 3.5, 4 billion and 80 people. And, it's changed a lot. I'm now the old guy. So
right.
the 7 people in front of me have all retired. And, it's I'm the longest tenured, I'm not the oldest advisor, but I'm the longest tenured, which is
Okay.
kind of a weird
You've
feeling.
been along for the ride for
Yeah,
many years.
that's right, for sure.
I thought that was pretty cool about playing for the Hawkeyes, but then I started to read that you competed in over 80 triathlons, right?
Yeah, it's kind of you get to know some people, and then you're like, oh, we should maybe do a triathlon, and then you get to know that community, and so that really what kind of just drew me in was, I love one of the things I love about our business, Lauren, and you've probably found this too, is that you're constantly learning, right? No matter how long you're in the business as an advisor, like you're seeing stuff you haven't seen before. You're just learning. Things are changing fast enough.
Yeah,
And so that's challenging. I love that part of it. And it's kind of the same with life. It's like, do a triathlon, then do an Olympic distance, then do a half Ironman, then do an Ironman. Um, so you're just constantly learning stuff on how to train better and eat better and sleep better and
sure.
get in better shape. And then the community around that was awesome. But I was fortunate to do five Ironmans, Ironman Hawaii in 2008, right about the time the markets were crashing. And in 2008 was, I was doing an Ironman in Hawaii. So not the best timing, but
Sure.
had a great experience, just really loved that. And then after that was looking for another thing to learn and accomplish, and always dreamed about getting my pilot's license. Um, was talked to a few friends and clients that had theirs and thought, oh, this would be cool, something that not everybody gets to take on. And so been a pilot now for 7 years or so.
Okay.
Um, and mostly do quick trips, Nashville and Ozarks and Denver and Minneapolis or Chicago. It's kind of fun to get to those places in an hour or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Not having to sit and wait at the airport forever before the flight can take off and all that.
Yeah. My wife, Katie, is an attorney and she's from Waterloo. Her family's still up there. And so we'll just bop up there to see them in like 28 minutes and Um, we had to drive the other day, and she's like, "Wait, we're driving?" I'm like, "Honey, it's only 2 hours."
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can get a little spoiled when
Get a
you
little spoiled. Yeah.
yeah, sure. Jumping back to the triathlons, I think you said you and some buddies did that. I think if a bunch of people are throwing around that idea, you don't want to be the one person that says no. So I can see how that
Yeah.
momentum of an idea can take you forward. Of the three, running, biking, and swimming, which is the toughest, or which do you enjoy the most?
Oh gosh. I'd say I enjoy the biking the most, and continue to still do that. Did summer swim team growing up, so I can swim fine. It's the most boring kind of thing. Running's the hardest because the longest I ran probably just about ever was like the 4x4, on the track, and most of the rest of my running was about 40 meters at a time, right? Playing football. And so it was really a challenge to go from doing that kind of fast twitch, short stuff to
Sure.
really train in your body to do an endurance, event. And I remember after my first 10K years before I did a triathlon, I was like, I am never doing that again. I am never running that 10K again. Like that was
Right.
that was too hard. But it's amazing, what you can train your body to do if given the right stuff,
Yeah.
with the right inputs and the right discipline. I'd say if you can do the training, you can do the race. Because the training I think is even harder than the race. The race day is just
Sure.
kind of a celebration. It's kind of fun versus the training
Interesting. Yeah.
can be really
It-
difficult.
As long as you're prepared for it, it's the fun part, right?
That's right. Yeah, for sure.
Um, so how is the Ironman different than the triathlon? Is that just like double everything?
Yeah, so around Iowa, you can race all four distances. A sprint distance is like maybe a 500-meter swim, 13-mile bike, and a 5K run. Olympic's going to be about double that. So like a mile swim, 25-mile bike, and a 10K run.
Okay.
And then you got the two Ironman distances, a half and a full, which a full Ironman's 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a marathon. So, all still have swimming, biking, and running, but they all are very different in terms of pacing and nutrition and the amount of training you need to do one pretty well.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I had a chance to meet a guy that they refer to as the Iron Cowboy, and I don't know if you're familiar with his story a little bit. I
Yeah,
think I
it's
think it
famous.
came out on Netflix. There's a couple of things on Netflix you can watch,
Yeah,
but
it was an amazing feat.
that guy's
100
crazy.
Ironmans in 100 days in a row.
Yeah,
So,
I
because
think
yeah,
he
the day
blew
after
away
my
his own
Ironman,
record.
I'm ready to like not do anything for at least a month.
Right. After
And
just
so
right.
he's doing one a day for 3 months straight. It's,
Right.
but it's again, like, your body is pretty amazing. If you train it right, you can get it to do a lot of things you didn't think possible. And, again, that's when people ask me about it. I'm like, hey, like, again, like find somebody that knows what they're doing. It's kind of like our business, right? Find somebody that knows what they're doing, that has some experience, that has proven success. And if you're,
Yeah.
pinging them for information, like you're going to learn a lot, and then just do what they say and you're
Yeah.
going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Find good mentors. That's a good, yeah. Well, and I think you touched on this already, but we probably underestimate how much we can do physically. But how beneficial is that to know that you've been able to, do 80 triathlons, more than 80, and not just physically demanding, but I imagine those have to be pretty mentally demanding as well. So I imagine that's a pretty good reservoir that you can fall back on when you're in challenging times, either in business or, I mean, heck, just in life in general, probably.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I started to learn that in college, with just the stress and the demands of being a student and an athlete, and, having social relationships and just different family really, issues, so it's like those things were hard, and, building from that to your first career and then to something like a triathlon. But I read something, I won't be able to quote where I read it, but that they said the average person quits 20 to 30% earlier than they probably could go. And so I always remembered that. It's like, hey, when things get tough, like, do I have an extra 10 or 20% still to give? And the answer most of the time is yes, right? Like
Right.
you can push yourself, but I think a lot of us, when things get uncomfortable, it's easier to quit. And so it's like things that are easy aren't necessarily good for you, and things that are really hard probably are,
Yeah.
most of the time. And so just spending some time, looking at some of those things and then just confirming them with what you're trying is
Yeah.
true. That's true with business too.
Yeah. I think if you just understand that you're going to feel uncomfortable and just embrace that instead of, running away from it.
Yeah. Keep telling myself this is good for me. This is good for
Right. Right.
me. Yeah.
What about if maybe you've already touched on this as far as like getting a mentor, but if someone was listening to this and saying, I want to push myself, I might want to look into doing a triathlon. Do you have any advice outside of getting a mentor for someone like that?
Man, there's a ton of information, online, obviously. A lot of different resources, a lot of different ways you can do it, kind of like financial planning, where there's information for do-it-yourselfers. There's information for like, hey, here's a general plan that's probably going to work pretty well for most people for a discounted fee. And then here's like if you want a personal coach that you can talk to every day, obviously that costs a little bit more. But I think in Des Moines, there's a company called Zoom that's some good coaches in that program and different levels of training and advice that they charge for that's been around quite a long time, probably almost 20 years. I think Matt Zapita is still heading that group up. So Matt's a great guy and has some good people working for him. So
And that's specifically
triathlon stuff.
for
Yeah.
training for triathlons.
They'll
Interesting.
do marathon training and triathlon and adventure stuff. They can cover
Yeah.
a lot of those things. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of that stuff kind of came about, I feel like in the last, well, I don't know how many years of like your Tough Mudders and different stuff like that, that people maybe got a little more excited about doing that versus just straight running, marathon.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's crazier
Um,
people than us that just did triathlons.
yeah, like bear crawling underneath barbed wire and in
Right,
water and all
it's
that
on
good stuff.
fire. Yeah.
Right, right. So let's pivot for a second into aviation. How did you get your start into flying?
Yeah, I think I only went on one small plane flight when I was a kid, with my dad and my brother and sister, and we lived in Perry at the time. And I think one of the doctors or dentists had a little plane and took us up, and I just thought, man, that is super cool. I was probably 10, maybe 8 or 10 years old. And so I always liked airplanes and liked to fly. And then I had a chance after graduating from Iowa to go work at Beach Aircraft Company in Wichita. It was a Raytheon owned company at the time, and I worked right at the factory in finance. But the assembly line was literally like right outside the door of our office,
Hmm.
so we could walk out and watch airplanes being built. And of course there's a lot of finished products around too. And so didn't have any money at the time, like just barely was making ends meet in my first job. And so didn't have enough to even get my pilot's license at an aircraft company at the time, which was super cheap. It was like a fourth or a fifth of what it costs now to fly.
Sure.
But then in 2017, I was like, this is one thing I kind of felt like I've left undone in life. And I don't like those things that, leaving anything undone that was kind of like a dream or a goal. And so made a few contacts and asked a few clients and a few friends that I knew were flying, and they gave me the name of a guy, Ryan Campbell, that was a pilot at Meredith, but also was a flight instructor, and connected with Ryan, and we hit it off and took my first Discovery flight. And he was funny. We were kind of in the plane and taxiing, and he was showing me stuff, and I thought we were just going to like taxi around, the tarmac that day. And he goes, all right, so we're going to pull out onto the runway. And he's like, then when you get the okay, like go full throttle and get your airspeed up to, 70 knots, and then just ease back on the yoke. And I started laughing. I'm like, yeah, right. You're like, no way you're gonna let me like fly this plane 10 minutes after we got into it. He goes, no, I'm serious. I'm like, oh, I said, okay, tell me again what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And so we took off, and then the rest is history. Like, fell in love with it, and got my license and got my instrument rating, and fortunately got a little plane with a partner of mine he flies jets for Delta,
Okay.
and so it's a great little scenario where I always say planes, boats, RVs, it's good to have a partner with, because
Right.
they sit around a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not renting a certain number of hours or anything. That's what you guys own.
That's right. Yeah, Des Moines has a
Cool.
couple of really good flying clubs. One's up in Ankeny and one's at the Des Moines airport. And so that's the best way to learn, I think, because they have multiple airplanes that you can rent and learn and build
Sure.
some time up. And then a lot of guys just continue to rent. And that's great. It was going to work better for us to buy something that was going to be around, and just wanted to know the maintenance history and kind of know who
Yeah.
was flying it all the time. So, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a dream come true. I love it. My kids like jumping in and going places, and of course Katie, my wife. So
How
we
old are the kids?
so the kids are 25 and 22.
Okay.
Yeah. So out of the house, off the payroll for the most part. And Josh works actually for Financial Architects, so where I
Okay.
started, and he's on the disability income side of that business. And then Cassidy graduated from Iowa State in December, financial planning major, and got an offer to work at Foster Group. So she's on our client service team
Oh, cool.
right now and has her CFP coursework done, and be sitting for the final here sometime in the next year.
Cool.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's fun to have the kids, in the business, and we try not to talk about that too much, but
It doesn't dominate the kitchen, the dinner table conversation.
that's right. Yeah.
So I know you have a hard out here that you have to get headed, but a couple of questions as we kind of start to wrap up here. Are there any misconceptions that maybe the general public believe, because obviously most of us aren't pilots, that you hear people say about flying that you would say is not true? Does anything jump to mind?
Yeah, I think the thing that you probably anticipated that most people say is, oh, isn't that dangerous? Don't small planes crash more often, or whatever? And I think you don't hear about the 10,000 planes that took off and flew fine a day.
Right.
You hear about the one maybe every few days or once a month that does crash. You hear about that in the news, and that's so it's just a product of that. The only time they're talking about it is if something bad happens.
Right.
And so I think there's a saying, there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there's no old bold pilots. And that is kind of true too. Like you definitely have some cowboys out there that take risks because they're just a risk taker. But a very uneventful flight for me is a perfect one.
Right.
You're prepared for emergencies. But in flying, if you don't mess with weather, if you don't fly into bad weather, and you don't mess with stretching your fuel too far, those are
Sure.
the two things that get pilots in trouble. Is if they're not prepared to fly into the clouds or into bad weather,
Right.
or they run out of fuel because they're trying to stretch it to a certain point.
Right.
That's about 90+% of any accidents.
And those are pretty darn preventable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So,
It's kind of
so
like with financial planning, it's right. Hey, if you don't spend more than you should and you don't
yeah.
take more risk than you should, like 90+% of the time, your clients, our clients are going to be just fine if they just are reasonable with those things.
Right. The other correlation that popped into my head with financial planning is that you never hear it on the news about a day when the markets just did fine or, they go up.
Yeah,
I think they say that bad news in the market is like 5 times louder than, maybe it's more than that, but it's definitely much louder than any good news.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
What about if I asked you what's your most memorable flight? Do you have any that kind of jump to the top of your mind of either for good or for bad reasons?
Well, a lot of good ones, just flying into beautiful areas, like down to Table Rock Lake or down, up to Leech Lake. Like just flying into those areas over the trees and lakes is like gorgeous. I mean, I've flown to Phoenix and over Albuquerque in the mountains. Like that's also amazing. So just some really pretty, areas to fly over. But my most unnerving one was I was flying actually a club airplane down to Table Rock, Kanakuk camps. My kids were going to camp down in Branson at Camp Kanakuk. And all of a sudden my radios quit working. And
Hmm.
so what had happened is the alternator had quit charging the battery, and eventually, the batteries went dead. And so all the radios, all the avionics stopped. Now the engine was just fine. The
Sure.
engine's on a different system. And so, but I'm talking and nobody's talking back to me. And so fortunately I had my iPad with me, which kind of pointed me to some different little airports, around southern Missouri. And I picked one out and was looking around a lot and ended up landing and safe and pulled up to the shop, and I'm like, hey, um, my radios aren't working, and the guy's like behind the desk, and just a classic, like, old guy sitting in an airport, he goes, oh, give me 5 minutes, I'll go take a look at it. And so he goes out and does some stuff, and an hour later he had me up and running. And
Oh, nice.
so, but it was, yeah, it was a little unnerving there for a
Yeah,
few.
that's a little scary when you're up there and you feel like you're by yourself. And they were, maybe, I suppose, a little surprised to see you coming in to land because they couldn't communicate with you, right?
That's right. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you've told us a little bit about, I guess we've touched on this some, but you talked about some of what you learned playing for the Hawkeyes and running, doing your triathlons. Anything that jumps to the top of your mind if you said, these are a couple of things I've learned from your experiences up in the air?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest one is like nothing in life is really given to you. You have to earn it. And I think that's a big challenge for some of the kids today is, you know, we as parents, I think, tried to make life somewhat easier on our kids. And I
Yeah.
think they struggle with, learning how to cope through challenges. And so, that was one I definitely, learned. You had to learn how to get through stuff that I think has really, really helped, in life through all kinds of challenges. And the other thing is, I've just gone through different life events that have been challenging, um, whether it's a health issue or whether it's a marital issue or whether it's a family issue or a work issue. It's like, we don't necessarily know the whole story all the time, whether it's our clients that are talking to us, or friends or things. It's like, be open to like knowing there's more than one side to every story. And it's like, hey, what can I learn, from these things? I think that's just maturing and starting to become more self-aware on those things, and using that for good, whether it's to teach your kids or coworkers or clients or yourself. I think
Sure.
I would say those are what really stands out right now. But
Sure. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as we've spent some time getting to know Reed Rinderknecht. We will be back in 2 weeks where Reed will talk about his firm, Foster Group. So that will be a fun one too. And if you'd like to connect with Reed, you can find his link in the show notes. Also in the show notes, you can find the link Share More and Get in Touch, which is a great way for people to reach out if they want to learn more about our firm here at Integrity Wealth Management. That's all for today, and I look forward to seeing you again in just 2 weeks for our conclusion with Reed Rinderknecht. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, we would love if you took a quick moment to leave an honest review. Of course, we're shooting for 5 stars, but if you have suggestions to improve the show, we would love to hear from you too. Just click on the podcast name, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement Podcast, and scroll down to ratings and review. Thanks again for your support, as this helps us reach a wider audience and help even more retirees just like you. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and co-owner of Integrity Wealth Management, an investment advisor serving retirees in search of their own healthy, wealthy, and wise retirement lifestyle.